Hi, I'm Chief Jeffrey Silver of the Westwood Police Department. I'd like to thank you for joining me for this opportunity to get an inside look at your police department here in Westwood and to see some of the challenges that we're dealing with here as an agency as well as a town in trying to provide the best public safety services that we can. Like anything else of its era, this building was sufficient at one time, but that time has long gone. Hopefully, after you take a look inside the station, you'll have the opportunity to see some of the things that we're dealing with and share some of the tremendous pride that I have in our officers that continue to deliver as high level of service as possible on a daily basis, notwithstanding these challenges we face. Unfortunately, the first court decision that comes our way, the first injury that happens, the first failure that occurs as a result of these things that we can't control and we can't change will buy and sell our police facility many times over. So let's take a few moments to go inside. And if you have any questions, as always, you can feel free to reach out to me here at the station. Our number is 781-320-1000, or you can reach me on my email at chief@westwoodpd.org. So in no particular order, the lack of handicap accessibility is a big problem, particularly since we're essentially, with the exception of fire, the only building that's open to the town and residents or visitors 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if we stop here and you see, starting even when people come in, outside we have 2 parking spaces that are not the appropriate width for vehicles. So if somebody comes up with any type of physical impairment requiring a wheelchair or a van or anything of that nature, they're relegated to this single space over here in front of the station that you can see. Just because of the natural landscape of the lot, the space itself isn't large enough. And then for public parking, these are the only public parking spots that we have for any one of a variety of business needs that people need to come in the police station. Since we're outside, I don't know if it makes sense to do it at this time, but in terms of security issues, all of our telephone calls, police, fire, medical, all the dispatch is done right in this building. And so it's important that we keep this building and the dispatchers safe from whatever threat that is. Yet we have the Deerfield Avenue extension that comes in off of Gay Street, as you know, and around the Deerfield School, and directly right in here through the parking lot. Creates a safety problem for a number of reasons. One, if there's a car accident, in this weather we've had several where people try to move out of the way and slip. We have a gas pump right there. That gas pump, if it gets hit, now you're having a massive emergency response right here, and the cruisers are literally boxed right in. You can see where the cruisers park, and you can see where the gas pump is. Even if it's an innocent accident and there's damage to the gas pump, with the fire and the other units that are coming trying to clear that up, the police cars are basically stuck in a log jam. That's the first problem. The second problem is when we make an arrest and we have somebody come in, this is the very spot where we bring the police cars. It's not secure. And so as we get somebody out of the car, and I know we've already talked about walking them into the building, but as they get out of the car, they're dealing with the town hall on one side and a public road on the other. So not only are there privacy concerns for the detainees' rights that people see them getting out of a police car handcuffed, but there's also safety concerns for the officer because that person can get out of the cruiser and run right out here into a public area. It should be confined. And then lastly, as it relates to this area, is the lack of secure parking. Oftentimes we have the public come right up, they pull into police car parking spots. As you can see back there, we have that garage doors open. And in that garage we do light mechanical work. We also have our animal control officer. That's his office. He sits in a garage with a desk with no area for the animals. And we know the people here in town, and rightfully so, are serious about their animals, and we try to provide a professional, appropriate law enforcement animal control service. That's where our animal control officer sits. So it's happened many times since I've been here that the public will come, they don't know where to park, they pull into one of these parking spots, they then walk through the open door to the garage, and they either walk into the animal control officer who has his back to them just because of the natural configuration of the garage, or worse still, they walk up the stairs inside the garage and they end up right into the police station. And we've actually had people walking in the lobby of the police station, in the hallways rather, the main quarters, looking for some assistance because they don't know where to park or how to get in or what to do. So in terms of security, it's about as far removed as you could possibly get from best practices or accreditation standards. Like, see, here's a car driving right by now, right? Imagine somebody's getting out of the car and they're under arrest, and that car that just drove by us on the Deerfield Avenue extension, or someone coming over to the town hall for business, recognizes that's my neighbor or that's my child's coach, whatever the case may be. Now, the person's absolutely innocent. It may just be an allegation that's disproven in court ultimately, but you can't put the genie back in the proverbial bottle, so to speak. Those privacy concerns have already been compromised, and there's no way around it based on the configuration of the building as such that it is now. An additional concern about the gas pump, beyond what's the more likely option, and it's just a vehicular accident, and we can see a car driving by now, there's only one car at a time, but many times, depending on the time of day, there are two cars driving in opposite directions, where you could have a gas spill and it cripples the police officers from being able to respond, is in the event of a malicious attack. If somebody wants to come in, that's a bomb waiting to explode. In the event of some type of attack, whether it's, when you say terrorist, I'm not talking about, a large-scale international terrorist event. I'm talking about in the homegrown type of terrorist events that we see that happen all over the place, and we saw it unfortunately at the Boston Marathon last year. Those were local people going to a local event. Right here we have a tremendous vulnerability with a gas pump that's only 15 yards away from the police station. And so if somebody comes over here and lights a match, we're going to have quite an explosion. Depending on the scope of the explosion, and that's an underground gas tank, and so we know that the fire is going to start above and it's going to go below. That's not only going to cripple the parking lot and the vehicles and the police officers that need to get places, but it's going to cripple our dispatch center, which is just right up here against this back wall. We do our police, our fire, and our medical EMS dispatch consolidated right here out of the police station. By modern standards, the dispatch center is almost akin to a bomb center. That's your secure area. You want to make sure that the public can call you and we can call the emergency responders to help the public in case of an emergency, and so that area is protected. In here, it's just the reverse. It's in a front lobby that has just simple plate glass, not bullet-resistant glass. It's in an area that's subject to people causing a problem back here with a gas pump, and it could be an explosion. It's adjacent to a garage door that for ventilation purposes has to be open most of the time, regardless of the weather. And we can see the type of weather we have today. And we can have people walk right in that garage door and inside an interior door, and they're right at the dispatch center. So one of the most critical and most sensitive public safety infrastructures in the town is the most vulnerable. And there's virtually no way to abate that in the building such that it is. And so from a processing point of view, when we have someone who's under arrest, they come right out of the police car. And now we've had several hours opportunity to get the parking lot clean with the help of our friends at the DPW, but you can see that there's still ice here on the ground. And when the temperature drops later in the evening, we can't control that. It's going to be black ice. This is treacherous. And so we have to walk this prisoner out here who's in public view for the world to see, for the residents to see, maybe for the neighbors to see. And we have to deal with the risk of flight if there's a struggle, because this is a common point of struggle with people when they're arrested, the initial time that they're put in handcuffs, and then the point of time when they're going from the vehicle to the building, which is why in modern facilities there's a sally port where you drive in, the door opens, and the door closes behind you. We have to walk the prisoner up, deal with the environmental concerns, then come to 2 steps. And even in the best case situation, we may have somebody who's not resisting, but they might be intoxicated or otherwise impaired. Their hands are handcuffed behind their back, and so they can't break their fall. So now you're asking the officer not only to watch out for his or her own safety, but for the safety of the person who's handcuffed. And if one or both of them lose their balance, this is certainly a good place to do it. Right here on the steps, with a roof overhung with snow, as you can see, with ice that drips down right onto the stairway. So as the officer comes up the step, he or she then has to grab the door and open the door towards them and step back, being careful not to fall off the stairs. You can see there's probably only about 7 inches here between the door when it's open and the step. So now you have to come back down off the stairs because you can't reach the door handle from down below. But once you open the door, you can't be here and do it because there's a person in front of you. The door's going to hit them. You have to navigate through this. You have an additional step right here that you have to navigate to get into the building, and then hold the door so it doesn't hit them. Very vulnerable position for the officer. The officer's firearm is exposed. All the equipment that we carry to help people is also exposed. Meanwhile, there are officers that may be trying to exit the building at the same time. You can see it's extraordinarily congested. And then once the officer gets in here, he or she has to enter a code. As you can see, this door is kept unlocked. When you're here with a prisoner, this code is plainly visible. So again, Newtown was far-fetched before it happened. This is just a public safety nightmare waiting to happen, that if you have someone with you, even if you've managed to navigate the cruiser, the ice, and the steps, and the door up to this point, they watch you put in your code to get in the building. Again, you have to open the door towards you, another problem. And now, at any point, on any given day, the person can come back here at 2 o'clock in the morning, go through the unlocked door, use the code that they just watched you enter, and now they're right into the building. So as I come in here from the main lobby, or the back lobby, I should say, this is not only a point of entrance, but a point of egress. So you have officers literally passing all the time in this hallway. No ability to segregate travel between the general public that may need to get back to this room to be fingerprinted for a lawful purpose, for a job application, for a firearms license. No ability to segregate people that are under arrest from anything from the most serious crime to the most trivial crime. And no ability to segregate officers that are just walking out to their vehicles to try and respond to a call for service or just get back out on the road. And so you can see that this is very, very tightly congested here. So when an officer has a prisoner detained, there are two schools of thought, but the common thread to the schools of thought, whether the officer is armed at some point or disarmed, is that ultimately you have to go into an area where there are no firearms. In the event that there's more than one prisoner in there, in the event that the prisoner, while he or she is unhandcuffed and doing some processing, has the opportunity to overpower the officer, you want to make sure that there's not a gun in the booking room. The way to do that is this is our gun locker. The problem is this faces the garage. So when the officer takes his or her firearm off and tries to put it in the gun locker, we have to be careful that there's not an accidental discharge. If there is, that's an occupied garage, and as I mentioned, that's where our animal control officer sits. And that's where he brings lost and found animals, and that's where some of the light repairs on our vehicles are done. Clearly less than an ideal spot, but we had to remove this gun locker from the opposite wall because the alternative was for the officers to safely disarm themselves, and it would be facing the booking room where people were getting processed. So we had to pick between the lesser of two evils. Additional concerns beyond the obvious overcrowding and narrow hallways here. We have a wall where we have to post mandatory employment regulations and other internal business. This is plate glass. And so in the best case scenario, if someone who's impaired or otherwise loses their balance because they're not used to being handcuffed falls into this, we have a significant liability concern as it relates to the officer or the detainee. There's really no other wall space to locate this on. And if you remove this sliding glass, which is supposedly shatter resistant, but I don't think I'd want to put a piece of glass this large to the test to see what that means. If there were no glass here at all, now you have pins and other things exposed. It's clearly a situation that's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, and both cases are bad. So as we enter the booking room here, you can see that there are a number of problems, all of which fail by best practices and modern day standards. Quite frankly, even by standards that are 20 years old, never mind the standards that are required today. Firstly, the door opens up here into the room. And when you do that, this is an area that's designated for somebody who's under arrest. So if you're walking in with a secondary detainee and a person here is sitting down at the bench, and in the system that we have now, with one hand handcuffed to this pole that's just bolted to the wall, you're literally bringing one person right into the other. It becomes a problem in instances of a domestic disturbance, which is very common. Obviously, if two people couldn't get along and that required our intervention, you're now bringing them face to face in an area where they can get to one another. It's dangerous. You have officers walking right by the feet of people that are here. You have prisoners that are in close contact. It just doesn't work. Another problem that we have is that there's no other place to sit or stand. So if we have more than one arrest at a time, which happens with a fair degree of regularity, you either have to have someone handcuffed to this pipe that's bolted to the wall, and you can see they can reach out and touch the wall. You can touch the person, so this is a problem. You can't have detainees that aren't segregated in this way. And as a secondary location, the only place to sit is right here on this bench. Again, you're literally side by side like you're on a park bench. Now this is assuming the best case scenario, two non-combatants, same-sex detainees. We have no segregation for males and females. We have no ability to process juveniles that are arrested for a category of offenses that allows us to bring them into custody, because the way we treat juveniles is different than the way we treat adults. And when the officer comes over, there's no barrier in between the officer and the person that he's dealing with. In many modern facilities, you see an elevated booking bench. We tried to replicate that in some regard here with this glass, but again, this is just standard glass. This isn't booking room certified glass. And very often people are uncooperative, and quite frankly, that's why they're here. And so while we try to put up some barrier for people that are trying to do unsavory things, they're trying to spit at you, they're trying to introduce you to bodily fluids in a number of fashions, and we try to abate that here with this window. More often than not, we have to come out from around the glass and deal with those people. And when you do, you can see now the officer is outnumbered. He either is flanked by a detainee here and a detainee here. If it's a single detainee, he or she is walking straight into the person who's here in custody, or walking in between two. It just couldn't be a worse situation. Add to that situation, this is the same room where people who get their firearms licenses or fingerprints for employment purposes come in and are fingerprinted. And so there's no ability to segregate the person that's here for a lawful purpose and the person that's here because they broke the law. Hey guys. This is Adam. He works our local cable access here on an unrelated issue, but I invited him over to take a look at it. So this is kind of exciting, Adam, because what these guys from Data 911 just installed for us is pretty much a state-of-the-art mount and mobile computer system. So as you know, the officers, this is their mobile office, if you will. And in the past, we've had laptops and monitors, and not just us, it's all over the country, that stick right out into the way where the police officers sit. So if a vehicle is struck in a car accident, they lean forward. There's been officers seriously injured, and less than a year ago, there was an officer killed in another part of the country for a mount like that. Also, as you may or may not know, we're going to be hiring 3 new police officers, and that requires that they do some ride-along training. In the old configuration system, this keyboard and the screen are part of a contiguous laptop type unit on a swivel mount. There's no room for anybody to sit here, so it essentially takes up the entire passenger side area. So this unit here is pretty sleek. It's airbag compliant. The monitor sits right back in the central area here so that the driver and the passenger get the use of the airbag. This keyboard here can swivel, so the officer can move that out of the way if he or she needs to. It actually takes all the factory controls from the vehicle that used to be mounted up here, the radio, the air conditioning, and so forth, and drops it down out of the way. And then the keyboard swivels back into place. And then it has an armrest, because we know officers come in different shapes and sizes. You can adjust the armrest not only up, but front and back. It's a pretty nice looking application. You can feel free to get in the driver's seat if you like, as long as you don't take off because the garage door is down, so that'll make quite a mess. The things that we can change and can improve, we're doing so, like the vehicles. We have higher visibility graphics. We have higher visibility lights, not just so people can see the officers going to calls better, but to keep the officers safer as they're responding to where they're going. And naturally, we don't want anyone hurt, an officer or the public. That's always our primary concern. But if you take that just to an actuarial point of view and a dollars and cents frame of mind, when people are hurt, that costs money. And so that's a risk to the town, that's a risk to the taxpayer. And so we're trying to mitigate that as well. And so things like those changes in the cruisers that I just mentioned, things like this new technology that I mentioned, where we can know that our officers have the benefit of the airbags that have been in vehicles for years, but they were compromised by the old computer systems that we have. Now we can use. We can get secondary officers on board for training. Their airbags will work. When we have our police explorers doing a ride-along, we know that they're as safe as they can be. And so these are things that, as they become available and as they're identified, we can change them. But the building, we're structurally confined, and we can't make those improvements. Although we try to keep it up and we try to give the taxpayer good value for their dollar by maintaining the building that we have and not letting it go to waste, there are things that just simply can't do. But this is the single men's room in the building. And unfortunately, the way that it shakes out right now, we're not especially gender diverse among the police department, and we're looking to change that. But be that as it may, dealing with the facts such as they are today, for all of our male employees, this is where they have to use the restroom. And we have one sit-down facility and one stand-up facility, and that's it. There's one single shower stall in this building from once upon a time when this was our locker room, but we had to change the structure of the building, obviously, to accommodate for our female officers. And when we did that, what we did is segregate the shower. So now, the only way an officer can use the shower, first of all, it has to be a male officer, and secondarily, he would have to, there's no room to change in that area. So imagine, if you will, an officer taking a shower in the single shower facility located next to the only toilets in the building, and then coming out into the main corridor of the building, the same building where we bring prisoners in, the same corridor where we bring the general public into, and walking with a towel or in a bathrobe down the hallway and then down the stairs into a locker room where there's no running water. That's the state of affairs such that it is. So this is the aforementioned restroom. You can see that we have only 2 sinks. We have a big box store, Home Depot, Walmart, Target type of item that you might buy for your house, not designed for commercial use, where we keep our extra supplies in because we have nowhere else to keep it. We have our electrical panels right here in the room, and I know that the consultants that we're working with speak about that in detail, but this is a code violation. You can't have these electrical panels in a room like this that's occupied with sinks and water and so forth. Then we have a single stand-up bathroom facility, a single sit-down bathroom facility, and then a shower, which again I mentioned. Imagine, if you will, an officer, this is a male restroom, a male officer trying to use this, and then come out and somehow walk through this, which as soon as you open the door to the restroom, you're stepping into the shower. So to do that delicate dance, to walk by someone who's in here, absolutely no privacy whatsoever for either person, regardless of what their purpose in the room is, and then walk out into the corridor literally with a towel around their waist to go downstairs into a locker room that has no running water. And this is our single men's room facility. This is the entrance to our female locker room. And talk about a lack of privacy, they have to walk right by our miniature office center here. This is where we have our scanner and our photocopier, our fax machine, our paper shredder. As you can imagine, in an administrative environment, it's a heavily used area of the building. Yet this is the entrance to the women's locker room. And so once they open this door, they're right out here into the office center. And if they're trying to get into the door, they have to somehow navigate around someone who's over here using the photocopier. You can't even get this door open. You can't get by with someone standing here. They literally have to step out of the way. We have no facilities at all, no so-called family restrooms to accommodate any type of parents with children. We have no facilities whatsoever to address, again, the mandated requirements for the possibility of a transgender employee or other subcontractor or person that's in the building. We just have no mechanism to adapt for that. We literally would have to post a guard at the door and close it down and use it for that purpose. We don't have any other facilities, and we have no room to put it. So this area accommodates only 2 police officers. This is where they do all their reports. You can see it's also a multi-purpose room. The officers have their respective mail slots here, but because they don't have any desks, because they don't have any file cabinets, any of the cases that they're working on, they have to take the incompleted paperwork and literally put it in their own mailbox. And in many cases, as you can see, those mailboxes are burgeoning. Not because they don't check their mail, because they don't have anywhere to store their files for the investigations that they're working on. I submit to you, where could they possibly put any file storage in a room like this? They can't. And so they do the best with what they have. In addition to the report computers that we have, in addition to the mail slots, which also function as the officer's very limited storage area for their files, we have our evidence supplies. When officers take items into evidence, the forms that they need are down here below, and the various bags and packaging material is up here, literally on top of the mailbox. Behind the door, you see some temporary storage facilities where the officers have to put the evidence. So imagine, if you will, and it happens every day, that an officer is here trying to put evidence in just a repurposed school locker, while another officer is trying to come in and get his or her mail or get information from a case that they're working on. Not getting hit by the door, making sure the officer at the computer to use the report is pushed all the way in, right behind the desk. Otherwise, it's policing in a phone booth. At the same time, as we round the corner, this is our single interview room. For all interviews, in all interrogations. What is this room used for? Someone who comes in who has a sensitive matter that needs to talk to a police officer off the street, they have to come through that same insecure lobby, through the same main corridor, and into this room right here. However, if we have someone who is being investigated and being interrogated, this is the same room that we use. It's the only room that has video. So we can only have one thing going on at a time here. When we hire personnel and they come in to fill out the employment application, this is the place they use because it's the only place we have a table and chairs where they can sit down. But this is the same room that would be considered a so-called soft interview room where members of the general public may just come in and have some information for officers. Maybe their house was broken into and they want to give us some information about the items. It's the same room where we're interrogating people that are arrested for the most serious and heinous crimes. It's the same room where we have people come in and fill out our job applications or our permits or any other type of documentation that we need here at the police department. And it's the same room over here behind you where we converted a cell that used to be used for juvenile storage, a juvenile cell for bulk storage items. The state and federal requirements more and more every year require us to keep documents and items of evidence longer and longer. There's just no way around it. We can't control that. We're mandated to store it, but we didn't have any room to do it. So we converted a cell that we used once upon a time for bulk storage items, bed sheets, golf clubs, any type of evidence from any type of case that you can imagine the police that would be involved with. We have to keep it not only for the pendency of the case until it goes through court, but sometimes many years later. And you can see, quite frankly, we're just out of space. We don't have the room. We have all of the responsibility to store all these items, but none of the ability to mitigate how much we store and how long we keep it. That's all mandated by state law. This room here is where we keep the car keys. And again, we use it for supplies. You can see we have vacuum cleaners and a floor cleaner that our building maintenance person uses. We have flashlights, batteries for our portable radios or walkie-talkies, as some might know it as. We also keep our extra crime scene tape up here. Literally, if there's a square inch that we can use, we use it because we just don't have the space. Imagine at the change of shift when officers are trying to come in here and get this information, and perhaps there's a sensitive interview going on in that room. Meanwhile, the officers are sitting at the report desk over here, and the only place that they have to work at, and all of that's going on at the same time. In terms of privacy concerns, in terms of maintaining the integrity of the investigation, it really couldn't be much worse. These are the two lieutenants' offices, although we're budgeted for 3 lieutenants, and quite frankly, once the organization reaches a size where it should be, which is around 40 officers, rather than having been allowed to attrit to only 26 that we have now, I don't know where we'd put the 3rd officer, but sticking him or her on a night shift or literally at an open desk when someone wasn't using it. So this is one lieutenant's office, but you can see it's not really his office because there are file cabinets from some of the different supervisors. They each take a respective drawer. Our animal control officer, who, as I mentioned, is sitting out in a garage at a desk, has a file cabinet drawer here. So if he needs to get his files or his reports, he has to make sure that the lieutenant isn't engaged in some type of a sensitive discussion. This is also an area where we keep all our bulk type storage for laptops, computers, administrative backup if some of the cruiser laptops go down, our portable breath test devices, a gun locker, and a vault where we have our weapons and our ammunition. And so you can imagine the lieutenant having an office here is really an office in name only because, quite frankly, it's an area that multiple people need to access. I'll direct your attention back here to a heating unit that isn't even fabricated anymore. About a month or so ago, this heating unit broke and the heat was on, but the pipes just froze and they burst. It caused a flood. It flooded this office. The flood came out here into the corridor. It came out into the floor and then leaked through the ceiling into the men's locker room. I commented at the time that when we needed running water in our men's locker room, this isn't what I had in mind, but that's what we had. That unit is so old that they had to fabricate a piece to fix it because they don't even sell parts for it anymore. It remained without heat for a little over a week while they were trying to get that situation figured out. This room here is, again, a multi-purpose room. This is where our 2 detectives sit. This is where our school resource officer sits. Our support services sergeant, traffic safety sergeant. Again, none of these people have any office space, any privacy. They're dealing with sensitive investigations, and many people think, well, you're the police, what's the issue? You can know what's going on. But there are some investigations that it's inappropriate to involve other people given the stage of the investigation. And so I would challenge you how anyone in this room could ever have an investigation that everybody in this room wouldn't have to be aware of unless they wore earplugs. You can see that there are boxes underneath the desk because there's inadequate storage space. There are boxes on top of file cabinets. There are boxes on top of file cabinets. And there are books and manuals from floor to ceiling because the officers have no individualized space to store any of this. So beyond the privacy concerns, it certainly creates a significant efficiency concern. This is our administrative section. All the payroll, all the billing, all the requests for reports, all the license processing, all the permits that get filed for parades and otherwise get done out of this room. We have 2 people that work in this room, and you can see that they barely have enough room to lose their train of thought. We have file cabinets behind doors. We have a general supply closet. This ideally was a closet for coats or umbrellas. We had to take that over and fabricate some shelving so that we could put our paper and our pads and our envelopes in it. We have boxes here on the floor because there are storage requirements that we keep things, but we just don't have the room to keep it. And so not only do we have to keep much of this for many, many years, these are documents that the women that work in this office have to refer to regularly, but they don't have the luxury of keeping it available because the only space they have behind you with those binders are the most recent documents. And so literally, they take the most recent documents and put it in the binders, and then the documents that they still need to reference, but they're not the most recent, end up in boxes. And so it's a staggered system where ultimately they make their way into a storage area wherever we can find it. Currently, and in the foreseeable future, it's down in the basement, and you'll see that's a boiler room, that's an equipment room, and that's boxes on top of more boxes. But this is the situation that we work in, and I'm very proud that it stays as orderly as it does, that we're able to service the town as well as we do, and get things processed in an orderly fashion. It's just, as you can see, it's a very challenging situation to do so. So this is the stairway that leads to the locker room, the break room, the training room, the storage room, and it opens right out into the main hallway where the prisoners are and all the other common ingress and egress that we spoke about. I'd love to have a community room, a Citizens Police Academy, and open up our police station to the public, but you can see I'm confined from doing so. This is a non-ADA compliant building, and beside the fact that there's some safety concerns of bringing the public in here, I feel very strongly that we should be able to invite our entire public in here. And so you can imagine how challenging it is for some of our more senior citizens to come down steps like this, or people with any type of physical impairment whatsoever, or even a temporary injury. It's a non-ADA compliant facility, but this is where we have to come. And so this is where our officers travel multiple times every day. You can see that that dumps right out into an area where we do some training. This is our classroom, so to speak, although it's not walled off. And so whatever is going on here, certainly they have to compete with the noise from the officers coming up and down the stairs. And it's not because they're noisy, it's just because it's a staircase where they're going to the break room. This is where we also have our Explorer instructional program. We hold our roll calls here. And we bring in vendors when we're working on equipment like we are now. As you can see, Lieutenant Hoban dealing with some vendors. And so if this were to change a shift, we couldn't hold a roll call here. So we'd have to stop the vendor presentation and move somewhere else or schedule it around the roll calls. The door in the back right corner is the entrance to the evidence area. Again, the same problem. Detective Tolan might be processing or gathering evidence for court on the phone with the district court or superior court talking about some sensitive issues. And he's literally locked in the basement because he may be walking out into a presentation, he may be walking out into an instructional portion with the Explorer program or a roll call. The door in the back left corner is a bulk storage area, and I think it's imperative that we go in there and take a look at what's back there, and you'll see what we're dealing with for space constraints. And so this room literally is the catch-all room. You can see over here on the shelves, we have some of the training bags and pads that we use for rape aggression defense course for our annual in-service training with the officers. We have boxes, we have supplies. You come around the corner, we have more file cabinets with files that we're required to keep, more supplies, literally boxes on top of cabinets. You can see these pads here in the corner that are in a heap. They're not in a heap because we threw them there. They're in a heap because the cabinet, even when you lock it, just doesn't hold the pads. You can't stuff, it's 10 pounds of pads in a 5-pound cabinet. And so where do you put a 10-pound cabinet, so to speak, if you follow the analogy? There's no room to do it. And so methodically, our building maintenance person or the officers will restack the pads in the closet, and it'll stay like that for a week or so. And then one day, without provocation, the door will burst open and the pads will drop on the floor. This is also where we have some of our server equipment for the computers. And what you can't tell on the video, but you can tell taking the video or narrating it, is it's a very damp, basement-like environment, much like the basement in any other building that was built here in town in the early 1960s. But this is all the only thing that we have, and that's what we have to use. You can see we also have some pesticide on the floor because in addition to the space constraints that we have to deal with, we share this building periodically with some of our rodent friends, and so we have to deal with that. And so again, this is entering a boiler / storage area, and you can see within half of an arm's length, you're already hitting things. And so when we have service providers in here to work, they can't work because most of the parts that are in here aren't even made. It costs triple the price to try to fix it as it would to try to replace it new. And to replace it new, you can't do it because the building doesn't have the infrastructure to support it. And in addition, it's not environmentally safe. As you can see your wet footprints on the floor from where you were walking with the camera. It leaks water. And then you don't want to talk about confined. Again, this is the same continuation of our storage problem. We have things that we're required to keep. We just can't get rid of it. We can't auction it. We can't shred it. We have to archive it. And so where do we stick it? We stick it in rooms like this. And so you can see, as far as you can see, and walk around the corner, you have things stacked floor to ceiling that are either evidentiary in nature or equipment in nature or files in nature. And we just can't get rid of them. But we don't have anywhere to put them. And so most of the officers, most of the time, don't have the luxury of a so-called lunch break where they gather together with some office co-workers and go out and get something to eat. This is our break room. And these are the officers that are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So when you're having Christmas dinner and Thanksgiving dinner at home, we're having it right here at this table. The problem with that is you can see, in addition to the stairs and the intersection of a training room and a roll call room, is an area here that doesn't even have running water. And so we have a microwave, we have some vending machines, we have some spring water, but the officers can't even wash a dish. They certainly don't have a stove. They can't even wash their hands, other than with a germicidal cleaner that's on the wall. And so you might think, well, why not just turn around and go into the men's locker room and wash up in there? The answer to that's simple. There's no running water. This is a wall that's been fabricated, so there's about a 10-inch gap between the end of the wall and the top of the ceiling. So literally the officers are in there changing out of their uniforms. They might be soaking wet from the elements. They may be soaking wet from some involuntary bodily fluid contamination. And the officers are just on the other side of the wall with an antiquated HVAC system, with no running water, with no ability to get cleaned up, walking right here on the other side of the door. But this is what they do every day, and they do it as professional as possible, but by any standard, this building fails at every level. And so when I talked about the water leak upstairs earlier, this is a section of the building that used to be a pistol range. Something that more than ever is an important thing. It's certainly, the use of our firearms isn't something that happens often, but it's liability rich. And so in that regard, this building was ahead of its time that it had an inside range. They had to forego that so that they would have locker space for their officers. And this is the locker space they created. Albeit inadequate, it's better than what they had. When we had the water leak, as I mentioned, it came down the corridor upstairs, through the floor, through these ceiling tiles. These all have had to have been replaced, through the lighting fixtures. The foam insulation that they used to have, and that they still have, from when it was a firing range, which gets contaminated with lead and other particles, got wet, and that dripped down onto the officers' lockers, soak their personal belongings that are inside their lockers. And the irony of it is that there was water leaking in to damage their things and soil their things, but there's no water in here to clean up with. But this is the men's locker room. You can see it in no way is large enough for the number of officers we have. You can this locker is closed, but if we could open it, we'd see that the door opened up literally right into a bench where you should be sitting down, trying to get ready for work, to put your gear on or off. Meanwhile, there might be another officer right here, and so you're literally on top of one another. The equipment that the officers are required to carry takes up a lot of space. These lockers don't adequately hold that, but if we had lockers adequate in size enough for the gear that they have and adequate in number for the size that the department should be, you need a room 4 times this size. So you can walk right into the communication center, which again is all the telephone calls to police, fire, and EMS here in town. Shortly, it'll be all the cell phone calls that are made within Westwood coming in here. The dispatch to the police cars, the fire trucks, and the ambulances. Yet you can walk into this room unsecured from the main hallway that we saw where you bring prisoners in. And you can also access it from the unsecured main lobby out here. This isn't bulletproof glass, this isn't a bulletproof wall. This is our desk, such that it is where we greet the public. So you can see, as we greet the public, as we often do, once they're standing in the same position that the viewer can see on the video, they have a bird's eye view to these computer monitors over here. And with a very slight turn of the head, these computer monitors over here. And this contains sensitive information that can't be disseminated. We can suffer civil sanctions and criminal penalty for the dissemination of that information. And so the only option that we had was to tint the glass to somewhat limit the ability of the people to see what we're doing inside and to give us a very small measure of security so that at least we could see who was in our lobby before they could see right into the nerve center of public safety for the town of Westwood. In addition, from that same vantage point, when this door is opened up, as it often is when we have someone in custody, you can see straight back to the booking bench. And so someone who's coming in to ask a simple question could find themselves in a situation where they're looking back into a booking room where they see their neighbor or their friend, and it's a serious violation of privacy concerns. Another issue that we tried to ameliorate by the tinting of the glass, once the glass is open and we have to deal with the public, there's really not much else we can do, but in terms of the structural design of the area, you can see it runs exactly counter to the way a modern, efficient, and legitimate public safety operation would run. Thank you for your time in taking this virtual tour of the Westwood Police Station with me. Again, I'm Chief Jeffrey Silva of your Westwood Police Department, and we're committed to service for you here in the town, for our residents, our merchants, and the people that come visit us. Unfortunately, this is a building that's a structural failure, that's an electrical failure, that's a liability failure, and it's an absolute barrier to the best practices of modern day law enforcement and accreditation at either the state or federal level. If I asked you to take your life just for a day without your cell phone, without your microwave oven, without your color TV, or your laptop, you'd tell me you wouldn't do it. But this is a building that was built and is equipped with technology long before any of those modern day inventions were ever made. We know that the world has changed. We know that the needs of the community has changed. And now it's time for our building to meet the needs of this community. We appreciate your support, and thank you for watching.